Why does religion, which has been with us now for thousands of years, still manage to flourish today, at least in certain contexts? To put it in a broader sense, why does religion even still exist today? Now, obviously, if you are a theist, these questions may sound borderline nonsensical, because your typical theist is going to just reply and say, well, because it's true. But for anyone who doesn't have a slavish adherence to dogma, I think that this can be a very challenging couple of questions. And I speak here from personal experience. For years, one thing that stalled my own full embrace of atheism was my inability to answer these questions. I routinely found ever more things that I disdained about religion, and yet I would also routinely look at the fact that religion has been with us for millennia. And while it may be losing some of its influence in some parts of the world, it's very far, by any measure, from simply going away or becoming functionally obsolete. And this bothered me a lot. You see, my assumptions were always like this. Although it's not a clean linear progression, society in general tends to get better over time. Technology improves. Living conditions similarly improve. Lifespans increase. Social mores, for the most part, do tend to improve. Now, I know that we can debate a lot of specifics of society, but we're no longer burning witches. We're no longer laughing at the town drunk. We're no longer openly advocating for slavery or Jim Crow. So on some level, it does feel across the board almost that society marches forward and not backward. So if something has a massive societal footprint, which religion even to this day absolutely does, and if that thing is generally harmful, as I admittedly believe it to be, then if you accept my belief, shouldn't it have been washed out of our modern society? And if it hasn't been washed out, then what is it that I am missing about religion? Again, this actually kept me nominally clinging to religion for quite some time, because I figured that I had to be missing something. How could all these people over all these generations continue to cling to religion despite the fact that I did not see the benefits? Was I really missing something major? Well, then again, Suicide Squad achieved a worldwide box office gross of $746 million. And it's the cinematic equivalent of deep-fried candied dog turds. So I guess there is at least some limitation to judging something's worth according to popularity. But nevertheless, this question nagged at me for a long time, because religion is not some movie that catches the public's imagination and then fades from view. Like a tapeworm, it burrows in and it can be incredibly difficult to root out. So it's worthwhile to consider the original questions, which were, why does religion persist today after millennia? And why has it not gone the way of the dodo bird? Well, first, even an atheist would have to tell you, would have to admit that there are some benefits that we ostensibly glean from religion. Religion is, if nothing else, a form of social glue. Now, on a social level, that I think that's pretty easy to see. It provides this de facto source of community. We get social interactions. We get fellowship and friendship. There's a coming together of like-minded people. It provides social indicators to know that there is this shared set of ideas, presumably values, a shared mindset or an ethos that brings us together as community. And to be fair, the same could be said of other types of social clubs and hobby groups, but religion definitely has a larger footprint than any other social group or hobby, social club or hobby group that I've ever heard of. Even if you rally behind the most popular sports team in your country, that's still nothing compared to the general social glue that's provided in general by religion. The social glue doesn't just apply to Sunday fellowship. It does, I believe, have at times more of a nationalistic benefit or value. You see, religion has historically, traditionally, provided a very strong basis for uniting people to commit acts that they normally would never commit if there were no religions. It can rally a large group of people around the idea of enforcing specific laws, but it also can be used as a way to rally an entire country for things like war. Now, when I say that, that sounds like a pretty bad thing, right? And Lord knows that most wars that have had any type of religious connotation whatsoever have been damn regrettable. But I think to just write off the idea of war and religion as being all inherently caught up together and bad dismisses the transition that we went through as a world society from hunter-gatherer groups to agrarian city-based cultures. Why does that have anything to do with religion? Well, when we were hunter-gatherers, we were in groups of 20 or 30 or 50 people. If somebody attacked an edge of our village, you didn't have to convince me why that was important for me to join the rest of my villagers and defend ourselves. Because if they attacked the edge of our village, they probably hurt or killed someone that I personally knew. They probably raided or destroyed resources that were specifically tagged for me or that I could have shared in or that I may have created or gathered. So it was always personal when one hunter-gatherer group came into conflict with another. But when you have a country the size of Rome or the British Empire or the US or anything else of this modern nature, it can be hard to figure out why I should care if somebody is attacking Seattle. And I'm not saying that I need religion to understand why I should care if someone is attacking Seattle, but it does provide a very strong common social glue that makes us feel as one, to some extent act as one, and even respond to threats as one at a scale much larger than we ever would have achieved if we were simply operating as hunter-gatherers or if we were operating in much larger societies without this common set of ideals. Again, to be clear, I'm not really saying that all of this is a great argument for religion today. But I do think we would be remiss if we do not at least acknowledge some of these benefits that have been brought to us by religion over the years. On a more personal level, I think that there is a salve that is provided by religion, which perhaps has never been properly replicated by other activities or other social groups, etc. You see, there is no greater fear in humanity than our inherent existential fear. What I mean by that is it may not be immediately apparent to you at all times, but almost every fear can ultimately be traced back to a fear of death. A near universal feature of religions is their promise of rebirth or eternal life or heaven or nirvana. And that fear of death, it's with us at all times. Now, you might think to yourself, I don't fear death. I don't wake up in the morning thinking I'm going to die soon or fearing that I'm going to die. In fact, you may feel that the worries on your plate right now are much more pressing and much more worrisome in your brain than this far off generic idea of death. But ultimately, everything that gives us anxiety around our everyday life somehow gets back to death. If you are worried about your job, it's because you want to be secure and well paid in your job, because to be insecure or poorly paid means that you won't be able to take care of you and your family and the means in which you're accustomed to, which means that ultimately those shortcomings may end up in a shortening of your lifespan. If you're having problems with your partner, those problems may feel like pressing problems on a day-to-day basis, but ultimately having a loving partner or a group of partners, what have you, in your ongoing life is something that makes our life better and actually gives us a longer lifespan on average. More people to take care of us, more people to watch over us, more people to comfort us when we are having problems. If you are worried about your children, everything about our children is on some level this psychological means of extending our life, if at least in a metaphysical kind of sense. So all of this, I really think, comes down to the fact that the deepest fear that humanity has is an existential fear, or to put it more simply, just a fear of death. Even if you're not stalked mentally by death, it is natural for us on some subconscious level to always be thinking about and worrying about the ever-present fear that eventually we are going to die. That can be stressful, it can be painful, it can be very hard for the psyche to deal with, especially in times where death might feel more imminent than others. And although I personally find religion's treatments of afterlife to be sad and wanting, I do understand that many other people will reach for that as this type of mental soma, something that dulls the pain, helps them move onward, and puts them to sleep if necessary. Aside from just this fear of death and existential fears that extend from all the little fears around us, I do also think that there is this really basic, kind of sad, but still really basic fear or need that we inherently have for justice or karma. It can be incredibly distressing to accept that bad things can, in fact, happen to good people. And good things can, in fact, happen to bad people. It is extremely difficult and stressful for some people to think that that guy who's been treating you like crap for the last couple of years in your job or in your relationship or living next to you as your neighbor, that he might never have a single bit of repercussion for his crappy acts. In fact, he may have benefited from treating you like crap. And for many of us, the idea that there would never be some kind of cosmic retribution for that is distasteful at best and extremely stressful at worst. Now, I would tell you that I think a lot of this fear for cosmic justice or karma is, quite frankly, kind of immature. It is a sad way of trying to deal with the iniquities of our everyday life, or I should say inequities. It's a better term. And it is very much like a child to want to feel that that guy did me wrong. How is he going to be punished? But as painful as it is to be, as it can be to move past that, I do think it is very healthy and affirming if you can finally get to a place to say, you know what, the guy did treat me like crap. I don't know if he'll ever have anything bad happen to him. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. I'm moving on with my life. But most people, if I'm being frank, never get to that point. And because they never get to that point, they reach for religion. So when they are ultimately fearing what is the great unknown of death and the maybe afterlife, they reach for religion and they wrap it around them like a blanket. And when they are ultimately stressed out by the inequities that they feel that are borne upon them by the outside world, they reach for and wrap themselves in this blanket of religion. And although I think that those things on some level are a little sad, I do understand that this helps to maintain this predominance of religion that we see throughout huge swaths of our society. There's something here I want to get into that is a little more esoteric and is possibly more depressing than the other things I've talked about in terms of explaining why religion is not necessarily a good thing, but isn't going away anytime soon. And that's called memetics. I'm going to be honest with you here. I mean, first of all, this is not my idea. This was originally created by Richard Dawkins, a very famous man and a very, very famous atheist. And there was a great video that I saw on this on Drew's channel. I don't know him personally. That's his first name, I guess. And he's better known as Genetically Modified Skeptic. I highly recommend his channel. If you're even looking anywhere at atheist videos, you've probably already seen his channel. But if you haven't heard of Genetically Modified Skeptic, I want to give him credit for really turning me on to this idea. But also, I want you to go over there and check out his videos. They're amazing. But he didn't come up with memetics. The idea for this was spawned originally by Richard Dawkins, which is kind of ironic because Richard Dawkins is a famous atheist, but memetics really doesn't have to do specifically with anything related to atheism. But memetics is really it's this philosophical discipline, if you will, that's about the evolution of ideas. The idea, no pun intended, is that individual ideas propagate and morph. They evolve over time the way species do. The individual unit of memetics is a meme. Now, the way Richard Dawkins brought this up, a meme is not some little quasi-funny picture with a humorous caption on it that we pass around the internet endlessly for 10 years. But his idea of a meme, he was the one who coined the term meme. His idea of a meme is a basic unit of thought, an idea, if you will. And these ideas, they go out there into the sphere of human influence. And just as species propagate by multiplying, creating offspring, memes propagate by being transferred from one individual to another. Of course, every time they get transferred, on some level they get adopted and changed and evolved according to those who are doing the transferring. Over time, just as with biological species, sometimes memes, which are ideas, they ultimately evolve into new ideas. Sometimes they split off into different ideas, which in turn evolve into new ideas. It's very much an evolutionary model, but it's an evolutionary model for thought. But when we think about thought or ideas in terms of evolution, it's important to understand what evolution is and what evolution is not. Despite what the creationist apologists idiots will tell you, evolution is not directed in any way. Evolution does not reward organisms that are better, and it does not punish organisms that are worse. Evolution doesn't care if a species is bigger or faster or smarter or anything. Evolution doesn't care at all about anything at all, because evolution is not a conscious force. And the only winner in evolution is the species that manages to transmit its genetic code to the next generation. Now, normally we might look at an environment and we can say, okay, the species that is dominating this environment is the one that is faster so it can catch more prey, or the one that's smarter so it can solve more puzzles, or the one that's bigger so that it can defend itself better against predators. We have these set of terms that we apply to physical species, and we assume that those terms mean that the species is better or worse. But sometimes, of course, evolution can favor something that's smaller. Sometimes it can favor something that we would nominally call uglier or stranger or weirder. In other words, evolution isn't rewarding species based upon our ideals of what is a better or prettier or more elegant species. Evolution is just rewarding whichever species does the best job at transferring its DNA from one generation to the next, to the next. I go through that explanation because if we then apply this to ideas, which means if we switch over to memetics, it's the idea that manages to instill itself in another mind that is, nominally speaking, the winner. It doesn't matter if you or I consider the idea to be a good idea, or a better idea, or an improvement over an old idea. We might think that the idea is objectionable, that it's bad, that it's harmful, that it's regressive. None of that matters in memetics. If we look at ideas as a type of evolutionary process of thought, then the only ideas that win are the ones that manage to find a way to cement themselves in the public consciousness and transfer from one person to the next to the next. Sometimes that does reward what you or I might think of as a quote-unquote good idea. So maybe you had surgeons that didn't used to wash their hands, and they would get themselves infected and they would get their patients infected, and this would ultimately lead to fewer of those people transferring their ideas around because they would die. And when people started figuring out that it was better to constantly wash your hands in a medical environment, everyone benefited. And then this idea that you should wash your hands became de rigueur throughout all of medicine, thank goodness. But that is an example of a so-called good idea that has survived on its own merits as a meme and has evolved and stayed steady over time. But again, that doesn't mean that every idea that survives or multiplies from a memetic standpoint is superior from our objective viewpoint. As long as the idea is transmitted from one person to another, or ideally from one person to as many other people as possible, then that idea, that meme, has essentially won the game from an evolutionary perspective. That idea that managed to propagate from one person to many others may not have been what you or I would call good or correct. It may not have been what you or I would call moral or helpful or even productive to those who hold it. All that matters is, did it move on to the next person? So what are the features that could foster the transmission of ideas, even if objective people would call those ideas bad. Well, there are certain aspects of an idea that might help it take root and multiply, even if you or I might think that's a bad idea. Those would be ideas that have embedded within them the concept that you should not question them. So if the idea carries with it this assumption that you should not question it, as adversarial as that sounds to rational thought, it actually does a good job of keeping the idea embedded within a population, because those who have the idea feel that they dare not question it. Does that remind you of anything? If the previous prevalence of the idea itself is considered proof that the idea should be held, that helps an idea stay resonant from an evolutionary perspective in the public mindset. I'll say that again. If the fact that an idea has already been prevalent is seen as proof that it should continue to be prevalent, that helps the idea stay entrenched. Does that remind you of anything? If we attach the idea inherently to loyalty tests, like to hold this idea means that we are then going to constantly check to make sure that everyone who claims to have the idea has the idea and continues to have the idea. That can help an idea to stay resident in the population. Does that remind you of anything? And if the idea has as a part of it the idea, the concept that it should be upheld without merit, in other words, it should be upheld for its own sake, that helps the idea stay resident in the population. Does that remind you of anything? When I saw this video that Genetically Modified Skeptic did on this topic about memetics, it was kind of stunning and eye-opening. It was a little depressing as well, because I had been working for most of my life from the assumption that ultimately reason and rational thought wins out. Society moves forward. In general, I do think that this is true. But when I took it this way, when I took in these ideas, I realized that some ideas can propagate almost because they are bad ideas. For some really bad ideas, within the communities in which they are resident, the fact that they are bad ideas is part of what keeps them rooted in the community, as nonsensical as that sounds. And that, I think, really speaks to the idea of memetics, because memetics does not treat just like evolution does not treat a species as good or bad, memetics does not treat an idea as good or bad. It just measures the memetic value of that idea based on how likely it is to propagate itself within a population and keep propagating to more and more people. There is one more way to look. It's kind of related to memetics, but one more way to look about why religion is still here and doesn't seem to be going away, at least anytime soon. Once again, I'm going to borrow from another YouTuber that I want to make sure to give full credit to. This individual is Durante Lamar. I have referenced him in another video that I did before. So you may have heard me use this concept before, but I think it applies very well to this video. He is a former preacher. And he said on a video that he did on the Mindshift channel, his channel has a different name, but he was guesting, he was serving as a guest on the Mindshift channel. And he said, quite simply, that Christianity only survives because of indoctrination. And when I heard that, it kind of stopped me for a second. It was obvious, it was simple, and yet is the kind of thing that I don't really hear said very often in that context. And there's some things that are so obvious that you kind of wonder why you had never actually put it in those words before yourself. But I'll say this again. Christianity only survives. This is Durante Lamar's words, not mine. Christianity only survives because of indoctrination. I mean, I believe those words, but I didn't want to act like I was stealing his quote. And that makes so much sense because indoctrination is perhaps the simplest, most elegant, and possibly the most depressing answer for why religion still proliferates all across the globe to this day. Now, indoctrination happens. It can happen with good ideas, but it also happens with very ugly ideas. Indoctrination, especially the kind that's associated with religion, is acceptable often in our society to be deployed at the absolute youngest and most vulnerable people in our society. If I tell you that I'm going to take your 8-year-old kid and I'm going to, bring them to the movies because I want them to watch a whole bunch of violent movies, reasonable people could say that's not a good idea. Even if you think that as an adult the movies are fine, to indoctrinate a young child with those movies is, reasonably speaking, not cool. But if I tell you that I am going to take my 8-year-old son to Bible study and we're going to read all over the Bible and we're going to read about genocide and we're going to read about the love of God, the God who drowns his whole population and orders that every man, woman, and child be murdered in Canaan, and et cetera, et cetera, that's not considered problematic at all. It's accepted and even encouraged, not just out in some public sphere, it's encouraged at home. It's accepted in many school environments. It's deemed by many to be a sign of good parenting. But indoctrination doesn't require that the idea itself is good. It doesn't require that those doing the indoctrinating have any reasonable skills as educators or caregivers. Indoctrination only requires that there is a vulnerable population. In this case, I'm speaking about every new generation. This population is available to be indoctrinated by those who want to inject their ideas into others. So, through existential dread, through social glue, through memetics, and ultimately through just plain old-fashioned indoctrination, religion still has a very strong foothold throughout the world. And I know you can pull out your studies about how religiosity in many countries has dropped over the last 100 years or so, and maybe it will continue to drop further. But at the rate that it's dropping right now, and at the rate that we're seeing counter movements in places like the US, I do not have any confidence whatsoever that it's truly going to die out or fade into oblivion anytime soon. Because some ideas, no matter how bad, carry the seeds of their own proliferation within them. And some ideas appeal especially to those who favor massive indoctrination. Thank you for checking out another episode of Cynical Sermons. I am your boy, Adam of NOLA. Please like, please subscribe, please comment, please say how much you love the video, please say how much you hate it, please put all your flame comments about how stupid I am. They've already started, so this is fun. But if you're here watching the video, even if you think it's total crap, I'm still glad you watched the video. And I hope that you found enough here to have appreciated your time and watch more. Thank you for being with me, and I hope to see you again soon.